I want to talk about some of the people that helped me get through 19 years in prison because it wasn't an easy journey and it definitely wasn't something that I did alone. And a lot of times I get this praise because I got a degree or because I became a journeyman electrician or because of what I'm doing now. But the reality is I wouldn't be who I am now if it weren't for the people who had loved me and guided me and supported me. And a lot of people talk about their prison stories, about how many people they beat up or how much money they made or how many drugs they sold. That's not me. Like, I'm not proud of my criminal behavior. As a matter of fact, my whole time was trying to find a way out of that life and out of that path and into something positive. And that's why I'm so grateful for the people who along that way really showed me a different way to live. So these I'm talking about are not just my family and friends. I don't just want to focus on the people I've told stories about before. I want to talk about some of the people on the inside and some of the people I met from distance. So one of the first was a guy named Carl. I met him. I was waiting to get a job. We were going to basically argue in front of the lieutenant to try to get a job as a houseman because it was one of those places when I first got to Nottoway. It was just super tough to get a job. Like, you had to go, you had to keep putting your basically your paperwork in, you had to keep complaining, you had to keep whatever, and then finally, if you raised enough hell, they would give you a job. So we were sitting on the steps outside the lieutenant's office, and he just looked at me and he said, "Look, man, I see you doing all that reading, I see you doing all that schoolwork, and I think that's great." He said, "I spent 10 years going to school and 10 years getting an education, and then I realized that that's not enough. That basically I can't live as an island, I have to do more with my life." And at first I thought, this guy's kind of crazy. But what he said, life is about people, and I really hope you find a way to have people in your life. And again, I didn't really know this guy, I didn't know what to make of it, but it kind of, something rang true about that, because I really did. I stayed to myself, I read, I studied, I worked out, I didn't mess with a bunch of people, because in my mind, prison was still a dangerous place. It was still the place I didn't want to be, and I had seen some really bad stuff. I had seen some experiences, and had some experiences that, I didn't really enjoy. I had my head almost split open. So that let me realize I needed to find a way to focus on relationships, because they really are what make life meaningful. Even today, being engaged, having friends, having people I do service work with, having things that I can do, that's what makes my life meaningful. It isn't, social media, or it isn't one of these things that we think. It isn't having a car, it's the relationship I have with other people. And that was really the moment that I came to understand that. This was also the guy that I used to write essays with, because he got moved from that pod to another. We ended up on opposite sides of the yard, and the way that prison was, it was fully divided. If you didn't see that person at rec, or if you didn't happen to get called to chow together, you weren't going to be able to see them. So we had rec at the same time on opposite sides of the yard, so we would meet at the fence, and we would give each other assignments. The essays that really affected me were about freedom, these kind of platonic, almost Greek essays, right? So imagine kind of trying to get into the philosophy of life, or what's important. And I wrote this one about freedom that he had assigned me. And it let me realize that freedom really is a quality of the mind. That no matter who you are and how powerful you are and how many options you think you have, it can all be taken away. But especially sometimes at my absolute lowest, when I had nothing left to lose, I felt the most free, because in my mind I was no longer trapped by anything. There was nothing to control me. So even sitting in the hole or sitting in shackles, there were moments that I felt completely free. And he had that profound impact on me. And the second one is Danny, and I've talked about him a little bit because he had this crazy backstory. He was this kid who was younger than me with a lazy eye and bad tattoos, and he really introduced me to and connected me to the idea of meditation and mindfulness, and how important it is to be present and engaged with the good and the bad of life, not just running away from it, not numbing ourselves, but being present with what is. What I found is the more that I can face kind of my demons or my fears or my parts that I've run away from in the past, the more I'm able to have some goodness in my heart. It makes me think, I don't really want to talk too much about family, but my grandfather, who I love to death, who isn't biologically my grandfather, but absolutely is my grandfather, he lost his son to suicide. And rather than break him, rather than make him bitter, rather than make him hopeless, after that grieving, after that pain and that struggle, he became an even kinder, better, more open person. And he was really the example of growing through pain, growing through suffering. That's why I think it's so important. And Danny used to talk about that. He, basically said that that's the whole point of a crucible. It has to heat everything up so you can separate the dross from the good metal or from the gold. And that was my experience, recognizing that this crucible that I was in, this experience of being in prison, these struggles, I could choose to allow them to make me the dross, and I could get defined by the negative experience. I could define by my past. I could define by, the things around me, or I could choose to allow it to make me the gold and separate the parts of myself that had gotten in my way before. And he really introduced me to that with the Tao Te Ching, with meditation, with martial arts, and that changed my life. That fundamentally changed my life. So moving forward, there was a librarian who was there, who I just really appreciate. So she would, the way the library worked there is you couldn't go over to the library. You just had to fill out a form, and they would send you a book that you had gotten off a list, or you could just say, hey, I want a fantasy book, and they would send you a random fantasy book. But I got approval because I was in school to go over there sometimes, and I started to be able to go over to the library, both to do schoolwork and just to check it out. And I was so excited And the librarian was wonderful because she was just engaged. Like I remember one time she was like, hey, is there anything you want to read? I'm getting ready to do a book order. And I was like, man, I got 50 books I want to read that I can't afford to buy, but like whatever. So I gave her this big list thinking like, okay, like maybe she'll get one or two. She got every single book on that list. And I was like, I was touched. And I told her, I was like, look, I feel bad. And she was like, no, I think you have really good taste in books. And I also think that you're going to select books that people are going to get something out of rather than just books that people are going to waste their time on. So not only did I get the books and have that experience, but she validated me as a person. And that was incredibly meaningful. So she was probably the last person there that had a really big impact until the psychologist and the operations officer. So my father died while I was there. I got the news. They let my mom come and see me only because the psychologist insisted to the warden that they were going to let her come up and see me because I was in the hole for possession of syrup, like literally like pancake syrup at the time. And she was like, no, like you're going to let her come see him. And then as I'm leaving the thing, she gets me called to her office, makes him take the shackles off me. And she's like, no, like, where do you want to be? Do you want to be here? Do you want to be, in a pod? Like, where do you want to do, your kind of grieving or your processing? So she was amazing. And I saw her the day before I left and just one of those people that has a profound effect on me that I still think about today and that I'm still grateful for today. And the operations officer, she let me get a phone call with my dad the day before he went into surgery, so the day before he died. So the same thing. She got me over there. She made him take the shackles off me. She was like, look, this is stupid. And she was the one who had actually released me because you have like a custody hearing and then a disciplinary hearing. And even before I went to the disciplinary hearing, she was like, look, I'm not going to hold you down here for syrup. Like, this is stupid. So I was going to be getting out anyways, but it was two people being human and saying, look, we know what the rules say, but this is stupid. Like, this doesn't make sense. This isn't humane. We're not going to do it. And that made a huge impact. When I got to the new prison, there were a lot of different people, but I went from like seeking out a teacher or seeking out somebody to hopefully explain or help me understand things better to seeking out kind of like allies and people that on this path of like growth with me. And one of those people for me was James, who was a psychologist. He's a Gestalt psychologist on the outside. He's also a meditator. He's one of those people that, how do I describe this? He just has like walked this path with me, and he has a far greater education. He has a PhD. He's been doing this for 40 years. He's been meditating for 40 years. But at the same time, he like allowed me into his life kind of as a friend or as a peer. And it was the first time that I really began to see myself as that way, as having that same potential. Because up to this point, I was really just looking up to people. Like I was looking for people who were teachers and I wanted to be a student, and recognizing that I could find peers was really amazing because it also meant I was in a position to share what I'd learned and shared my experiences. And realizing that and kind of giving me that like platform, I guess you could say, that I felt comfortable sharing that and I felt comfortable teaching and I felt comfortable guiding really changed my perspective as well. So then I go back to Mr. Sykes, man. He's just, in a way, he's my hero. So he was the electrical instructor, and he had come from, the same kind of background as a lot of the people I was in prison with. A lot of his buddies had gotten locked up or gotten killed or had a bad life, and he managed to get away. Like, he was one of the ones who never got caught. And so he changed his life. He went and he became an electrician. He was a journeyman electrician, then a master electrician. Then finally one day he was like, man, I want to do something different. Like, I want to do something better. So he came to work at the prison. And he was making so much money on the own. Like, he could have continued to run his own business, run whatever, but he chose to come to the prison because he wanted a person of color to be able to be there and say, hey, I'm an electrician, I made it. Like, I can show you how to make it too. Because almost everybody on the maintenance staff, almost all the vocational teachers were white. And I remember thinking, like, if I was a black or a brown kid and I come in here and all I see are, white people in this trade, I'm not necessarily going to believe it's possible. I'm going to continue to feel like, well, that's not an option for me. That's another thing that I can't do. So he really inspired people. I mean, he went out of his way. He connected people with real jobs when they got out. Remember, one guy got out and like 6 months later, he's making like $40 an hour doing traveling electrical work. Another guy's making like $35 an hour. And these were guys who had come from a background where they never thought that was possible. So he probably single-handedly changed more lives than any other staff member I saw, just by his kind of willingness. He ended up winning this award for like Employee of the Year for the Central Region, like the whole Central Region for all the staff. And then they still didn't want to let him like control how he spent his budget or what he did with classes. And it's like, dude, he's like leading the way. He put together this amazing job fair. He got all these people to come in, connect people with jobs, getting out. And like, y'all don't want to give him any say in what he does in his class or how he spends the money. Like, come on, this is ridiculous. So he ended up leaving and partnering with the school that was going to allow him to do vocational training and kind of reserve spots for people getting out of prison. Like, he made sure to have a way to continue to have an impact. And he was going to set up a halfway house to where guys could go out to, they could work for his company and they could get apprenticeship training there so they could become like licensed electricians. So he was one of those people that, again, just like make your day, like just absolutely, I don't know. But I had a bunch of other staff that I connected with. There was one woman who used to do professional development. I would always go get her books from the library, like people that I was kind of friendly with or that showed me their humanity and allowed me to show them mine. Or yeah, I think though it was tough because at Buckingham, I really got to the point where I was like kind of growing on my own and I was connecting with other people out in the world. And I had some really good friends and some people that I taught and people that taught me. But then the move came, then I moved to Coffeewood in the middle of the pandemic. I went from a single cell in the Honor Pod to an open dormitory, and I was completely losing my mind. And there were not a lot of people there that I like felt an appreciation for. Like the first unit I went into, I'd been teaching Spanish and nonviolent communication and DBT, and I went to the counselor. I was like, hey, I want to do this. She was like, cool, let me know what you need. She got me like an easel. She let me do stuff. We were only in that dorm for, I don't know, a couple weeks, and then the quarantine was over. I go to the next dorm and I tell that unit manager, like, hey, I want to do these things. And she was like, yeah, we don't do programs here. I was like, you're kidding, right? Like, there's got to be something. But this first unit manager, this person kind of took a vested interest in me, would like pull me out and be like, hey, this job's getting ready to come up and you need to apply for this. Or, hey, I really want you to do this. Like, I think it's a way you could get back to people. And what I saw in her was a person who cared, was a person who was like actively engaged in trying to help other people and like just showing up and really caring about her job and believing it was about corrections, not just warehousing or punishment. Thought that was cool. And then there was an officer who worked over at medical. I finally got a job as a medical worker. So I was basically like a custodian. I stacked things, I organized things, I did an inventory, not a big deal. But he was just a decent person. Like he just would treat everybody in the middle of, throes of a breakdown or anger or, guys were overdosing or drunk and crazy. Like he would just treat people like people. And he had a temper, he had everything else, but I just remember really appreciating him. And the day that I left, the day that I got my pardon and walked out, he wasn't working that shift because you have split shifts. I remember wishing I could have like shaken his hand and walked out, because what I saw in him again was somebody who just was a decent guy who wanted to treat people well and wanted other people to believe in their own possibility or their own, kind of future. And I didn't see that a lot. I didn't see a lot of positivity from the staff. So those people that really stand out, and there are a lot I'm sure that I'm missing, and there are a lot of little moments, but those are the people that I think had the biggest impact on me.